Now that you know the basics of ground control, it's time to look at the airport you'll be working on here at UND. Academy Airport is the focus of all your tower classes, so learning the layout and procedures is essential. Hello, I'm Kyle Warner. We're going to take a look at the basics you learned in the last episode and apply them to Academy Airport, along with some procedures and phraseology you'll use in the labs. All that and more is coming up today on ATCast.
Thank you. JetBlue 1264 Boston, ground taxi ramp via November and Alpha. Boston Tower, Gulfstream 717, Alpha Pop 30 on the ILS 4 right approach. Thank you, sir. 741 is checking out. 741 Boston Tower, good evening. Thanks for your phone. 737 just inside Mel. I'm like 4 right, clear to land. Touch by 2 months, white 1005. 117, thanks for the service. Terminates clock VFR for the change. So we'll see you back. 117, okay, good night now.
Dan Lindsay joins me from the Tower Lab. Dan?
Thanks, Kyle. In this second episode in our series on ground control, we're going to look at procedures and phraseology specifically for dealing with aircraft and vehicles here at Academy Airport. The last episode will deal with helicopter operations and some of the unique considerations and procedures you'll need to use for them. Let's start out by looking at the layout of Academy Airport. This map can be found in your air traffic control training guide. You'll have to memorize it at some point, so start on it early if you haven't already. This map is similar to what you'll train on at the FAA Academy in Oklahoma City, so knowing it inside and out will help you a lot once you get there. Academy has 3 runways: runway 10 left, 28 right, runway 10 right, 28 left, and runway 1634. Runways 28 right and 28 left will be active most of the time, but in later classes you'll use 10 left and right. You may also use runway 1634 depending on which class you're taking. Academy has 9 taxiways shown here: Taxiway India, Bravo, Alpha, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, Golf, and Hotel. Like we mentioned in the previous episode, each of the runways, helipads, and taxiways is a movement area. All other areas are non-movement areas. There are also 3 helipads shown here. They're named for the taxiway they're on. For example, Helipad Charlie, Helipad Delta, Helipad Foxtrot. Aircraft have 6 basic locations from which they will taxi: Terminal A, Terminal C, Terminal D, the General Aviation Ramp, this area which is called the Throat, and Falcon Air or Spartan Aviation. Arriving aircraft can be heading to any one of these areas to park, so how will you know where they're going? The pilot should tell you during his or her initial call. If they don't, ask by saying, "Say parking spot." Note to pseudopilots: you can tell where an arriving aircraft is going by typing in TTP for taxi to parking. This will show a line on the screen that indicates where the aircraft intends to park. Then quickly type AT for cancel taxi, so that the aircraft doesn't actually move until ground control issues the taxi instructions. You, as the ground controller, need to decide ahead of time how aircraft will move around the airport. Taxiways aren't like streets. They don't have a designated direction in which traffic is supposed to move. Aircraft and vehicles can move in either direction, so you'll have to decide which way that will be so that you avoid traffic conflicts. The easiest way to do this is to use one taxiway for inbound traffic and one for outbound traffic. It just so happens that you have 2 parallel taxiways at your disposal, India and Bravo, shown here. So you may decide that all your arriving traffic will use taxiway India and all your departing traffic will use Bravo. You could also do it the other way around, but the point is that you should decide which one is which and stick to that plan for the entire scenario. Use of the other taxiways will depend on your situation. Most aircraft will depart from Alpha, but depending on your class you may be required to use Charlie and Delta for certain aircraft types in order to practice intersection departures or wake turbulence holding. Some instructors might also have you use taxiway Foxtrot for helicopter departures. Most arriving aircraft will exit the runway at taxiway Echo. Heavy jets will usually exit at Golf, and small single-engine aircraft will exit at Delta. These are default settings in the simulator, so aircraft will automatically turn off the runways at these spots unless the pseudopilot is told to do otherwise. If you need aircraft to turn off the taxiways other than these defaults, let the local controller know. He or she will then have to tell the pseudopilots, who will have to manually enter those commands. Why would you need an aircraft to turn off somewhere other than the default? One reason is runway 1634. If this runway is in use, keep in mind that taxiway Echo is the only way to get there, so you will need to coordinate with your local controllers to keep it clear of arriving traffic. Another reason is that you might be using taxiway delta for departing aircraft. If this is the case, you definitely don't want VFR arrivals turning off there. The bottom line is that your job is to facilitate the safe, orderly, and expeditious movement of aircraft around the airport. Remember that pilots may have limited visibility from the cockpit, they usually can't see behind them, and most importantly, they can't back up without the aid of a tug if they end up nose to nose. So be aware of where your traffic is on the movement areas and where it will be entering the movement areas. Memorizing the airport map will help you a lot when doing ground control, and will help you develop a mental picture of what's going on while you're issuing taxi instructions. Keep an eye on your traffic at all times to make sure that there will be no conflicts and that the aircraft and vehicles are going where they're supposed to be going. Real pilots and pseudo-pilots sometimes misunderstand an instruction or take an instruction that's meant for another aircraft, but it's your job to make sure that your instructions are being correctly followed. And regardless of how you decide to work your traffic, always remember to be flexible and leave yourself some wiggle room so that you can deal with unforeseen circumstances. Finally, as ground controller at Academy Airport, you will also be responsible for updating the ATIS and doing clearance delivery. See episodes 9 and 10 of ATCast for more on these responsibilities. Coming up next, we'll look at the procedures and phraseology you'll need to know for aircraft and vehicles, and hear some examples from the Tower Lab. Which of the following is a duty of the ground controller at Academy Airport? A. Controlling traffic on the airport's taxiways. B. Clearance delivery. C. ATIS. D. All of the above. The answer is D. The ground controller at Academy Airport is responsible for all of these things. True or false? Taxiways are designed so that traffic can only go in one direction along them, and are designated that way so that pilots will know which way to go. The answer is false. The controller must decide what direction traffic will go on taxiways. They do not have a designated direction for traffic movement. Now let's go over some of the procedures and phraseology you'll be using in class. In the interest of time, we'll assume that only runways 28 right and 28 left are in use. For runways 10 left, 10 right, 16, or 34, the format of the phraseology is the same. Just plug in the different routes and runway numbers. First things first, in Chapter 3, Section 7, Paragraph 2, the 7110 lists 3 things you must do when issuing taxi instructions. Issue the route for the aircraft or vehicle to follow on the movement area in concise and easy to understand terms. The taxi clearance shall include the specific route to follow. When a taxi clearance to a runway is issued to an aircraft, confirm that the aircraft has the correct runway assignment. So, your instructions should be easy to understand. It must include the specific route you want the aircraft to follow, and if the aircraft is taxiing to a runway, the pilot must read back the runway assignment. Let's say American 424 Heavy wants to taxi from Terminal Alpha to runway 28 right. The 7110 says, when authorizing an aircraft to taxi to an assigned takeoff runway and hold short instructions are not issued, specify the runway preceded by taxi to and issue taxi instructions. This authorizes the aircraft to cross all runways or taxiways which the taxi route intersects, except the assigned takeoff runway. This does not authorize the aircraft to enter or cross the assigned takeoff runway at any point. In this case, American 424 Heavy will not need to cross any other runways, so the phraseology would simply be, American 424 Heavy, taxi to runway 28 right via taxiway Alpha. This instruction authorizes American 424 Heavy to taxi to runway 28 right on taxiway Alpha, but not to enter the runway. Now let's say that American 424 Heavy needs to go to runway 28 left instead of runway 28 right. This changes the phraseology slightly, because the aircraft will need to cross runway 28 right on its way to runway 28 left. The 7110 says, specify the runway for departure, taxi instructions, and hold short restrictions when an aircraft will be required to hold short of a runway or other points along the taxi route. Using this formula, the phraseology would be, American 424 Heavy, runway 28 left, taxi via Alpha, hold short of runway 28 right. American 424 Heavy can taxi to runway 28 left on taxiway Alpha, but must hold short of runway 28 right and wait for permission to cross it. In order to cross runway 28 right in this example, or any active runway, you have to get permission from the local controller who is working that runway. You do so by saying cross the name of the runway at the appropriate intersection. In this case, it would be cross runway 28 right at Alpha. When granting permission to cross the runway, the local controller will repeat what you said and may add an instruction like after arriving traffic. If they can't let you cross the runway, they may say unable or hold short of the runway, and then provide a reason. Before you even ask, take a look at the D-Bright and see where traffic is on final. If you see traffic on a 2 or 3 mile final, you can be pretty sure that local won't let you cross, so don't waste their time by asking. Wait until there's a gap between arrivals and ask then. When your traffic is clear of the runway, tell the local controller by saying the name of the runway, crossing complete. This is really important because until you say this, the local controller has to assume that the runway is occupied, and they cannot allow aircraft to land or depart. Local can watch the crossing and prompt you by saying the runway name, crossing observed, but you still must say the runway name, crossing complete, before local can use that runway. What if you have traffic on a different taxiway that you want to put in front of someone else? Let's say American 424 Heavy is taxiing to runway 28 right, and there's an aircraft on taxiway Bravo that you want to put in front of it. You would use the same phraseology as before, but with a slight difference. American 424 Heavy, runway 28 right, taxi via Alpha, hold short of taxiway Bravo. This tells the pilot to taxi to runway 28 right on taxiway Alpha, and to stop before crossing taxiway Bravo. Once the traffic on Bravo has turned onto Alpha, you would say, American 424 Heavy, continue taxiing. Now let's say November 666 Golf Bravo is on the GA ramp and wants to taxi to runway 28 right and depart from the Delta intersection. The phraseology for this taxi instruction would be, November 666 Golf Bravo, taxi to runway 28 right via taxiway India, Delta. The pilot will taxi onto India, make a right turn onto Delta, and then hold short of runway 28 right. For runway 28 left, you would say, November 666 Golf Bravo, runway 28 left, taxi via India, Delta, hold short of runway 28 right. Remember that if the aircraft has to hold short of anywhere before reaching the departure runway, you have to state the departure runway first and the holding instructions last. Let's look at an example of an aircraft at Spartan Aviation that wants to taxi to runway 28 right. SPAS 33 will have to cross runway 16 on its route. Some instructors will have you consider it to be active even if you don't use it for anything. SPAS 33, runway 28 right, taxi via Foxtrot, Bravo, Alpha, hold short of runway 16. The aircraft will taxi straight out on Foxtrot, turn left on Bravo, and hold short of runway 16. Once given permission to cross runway 16, SPAS 33 will continue on Bravo, turn right on Alpha, and hold short of runway 28 right. You might be wondering how you'll know what direction aircraft needs to depart. North departures all take off from runway 28 right, and south departures take off from runway 28 left. This ensures that they always turn away from each other and never cross paths once airborne. You'll know which one to issue in the taxi instruction by looking at the aircraft's route of flight on its flight progress strip. What about arrival aircraft? As mentioned before, pilots should tell you where they want to go when they call you after turning off the runway. The same basic phraseology format applies here. Aircraft call sign, taxi to parking via, and then the route. If you need the aircraft to hold short of a runway or taxiway, state that at the end of the instruction. Delta 1231 Heavy has just turned off of runway 28 right on Golf and needs to taxi to the terminal. The phraseology would be Delta 1231 Heavy, taxi to parking via India, hold short of runway 34. This instruction tells the pilots to turn onto India and follow it all the way to the terminal, but to hold short of runway 34. The phraseology for dealing with vehicles is almost the same as it is for aircraft. The only difference is that instead of taxi, you'll say proceed. Only aircraft taxi. Vehicles always proceed. Airport 12 is at crash rescue and wants to do an inspection of runway 28 right. The phraseology is, Airport 12, proceed to runway 28 right via taxiway India, Alpha. This allows Airport 12 to drive on taxiway India, turn right on Alpha, and hold short of runway 28 right. If it needed to go to runway 28 left instead, simply use the same formula you would for an aircraft. Airport 12, runway 28 left, proceed via taxiway India, Alpha, hold short of runway 28 right. Now let's go over a few other phraseology items you should know. You may need to have an aircraft stop so that another can go in front of it. To do so, simply say, aircraft call sign, hold for, and then provide a reason. Or aircraft call sign, hold position. When giving the reason, be concise but descriptive enough that the pilot knows what you're talking about. For example, you might say something like, Northwest 188, hold for the Continental 737 entering taxiway Bravo from your left. When you're ready for the aircraft to taxi again, simply say, aircraft call sign, continue taxiing. Pilots must always read back hold short instructions. It doesn't matter if they're holding short of a runway or taxiway. If you tell them to hold short, they have to read it back. If they don't, you must prompt them by saying, aircraft call sign, read back hold instructions. Occasionally, a pilot or vehicle operator may not be familiar with the airport, or other factors like reduced visibility or construction may require you to issue what's called progressive taxi instructions. As the 7110.65 notes, progressive instructions may include step-by-step directions and/or directional turns. This may require you to watch the aircraft as it taxis and provide instructions as it reaches an intersection or runway. It really just depends on the pilot or vehicle operator's needs. You are required to provide the service if requested. Lastly, if you need a vehicle or aircraft to expedite their movement for some reason, such as for a runway crossing with traffic on final, you can do so by saying, aircraft call sign, taxi without delay, and provide traffic information if necessary. Or, aircraft call sign, exit or proceed or cross the runway or taxiway without delay. Don't use the word expedite or immediately unless an aircraft accident is imminent. Now let's listen to a couple radio calls so that you can get a feel for how this works in the tower labs. Since clearance delivery is covered in a different episode, we'll assume that the aircraft has already been issued its IFR clearance.
Academy Ground, American 880 is ready to taxi.
American 880, runway 28 left, taxi via Alpha, hold short of runway 28 right.
Taxi runway 28 left via Alpha and hold short of runway 28 right, American 880.
Academy Ground, Delta 413 Heavy on taxiway Golf, request taxi to the terminal.
Delta 413 Heavy, Academy Ground, taxi to parking via India, hold short of runway 34.
Delta 413 Heavy, taxi to terminal via India, hold short runway 34.
Cross runway 34 at India.
Cross runway 34 at India.
Delta 413 Heavy, cross runway 34.
Delta 413 Heavy, cross runway 34.
Runway 34, crossing complete. Ground, Airport 12 at Crash and Rescue, would like to go to runway 34 for a FOD check.
Airport 12, Academy Ground, proceed to runway 34 via taxiway India, Echo, Hotel.
Runway 34 via India, Echo, Hotel, Airport 12.
Coming up next, we'll recap the important points from this episode. Which of the following has to be said first in a taxi clearance when an aircraft will hold at some point before reaching its assigned runway? A, the taxi route. B, holding instructions. C, any cautionary advisories. Or D, the assigned runway. The answer is D. Whenever an aircraft or vehicle will hold at some point before reaching the assigned runway, the assigned runway must be read first in the taxi clearance. A taxi clearance without hold short instructions authorizes the pilot to do which of the following? A, enter the assigned takeoff runway. B, cross any intervening runways before the assigned runway. C, use a route of the pilot's choosing. Or D, none of the above. The answer is B. Taxi instructions that do not include holding instructions allow a pilot to cross any runway except for the assigned takeoff runway. Now for a quick review. Academy Airport has a fairly simple layout, with 2 parallel runways and a crosswind runway, various taxiways, and ramp and terminal areas. Memorizing the airport layout is essential for being successful as a ground controller. Decide ahead of time how traffic is to move around the airport, which taxiways will be used for arriving and departing aircraft, and which intersections, if any, will be used for departures. Once you have a plan, stick to it, but be flexible so that you can deal with changing circumstances. Check the ATIS often for changes in the weather. It's your job to update it and to inform the local controllers when it does change. When issuing taxi instructions, Issue the specific route the aircraft or vehicle is to follow, and use clear and concise terms. If a vehicle or aircraft will have to hold short of a runway or taxiway, make sure you include that information in the instructions. If the pilot doesn't read back the hold instructions, you must ask them to read it back by saying, "Read back hold instructions." If you need to cross a runway, coordinate with the appropriate local controller by saying, "Cross the name of the runway at the appropriate intersection." If granting permission, the local controller will respond with that same phrase, or they may give you a conditional phrase such as, "Cross runway 28 right after arriving traffic." If local can't let you cross, they will say "unable" or "hold short of the runway," and then provide a reason. Once your traffic is clear of the runway, inform the local controller by saying the name of the runway, "Crossing complete." Keep an eye on your traffic at all times, and be aware of where traffic will be entering or exiting the movement areas so that you can avoid conflicts. Keep pilots informed of traffic around them because they may have limited visibility from the cockpit. Now that you've learned about dealing with aircraft and vehicles, be sure to check out the last episode in this series, which will cover helicopter operations. Kyle, back to you.
Thanks, Dan. On behalf of UND Air Traffic Control, the Student Air Traffic Controller Association, and the Aerospace Network, thanks for watching. My name is Kyle Warner. Frequency change approved.
Learn more about UND Air Traffic Control and watch more episodes of ATCast by logging on to www.undsatca.org. Students may interactively test their knowledge by taking the ATCast quizzes on SATCA's Easy LMS page. ATCast can also be downloaded for free to your portable media device. Just search for ATCast on iTunes U.